This is Dr. K, one of the greatest psychology communicators currently on the planet. He's helped millions to gain life-changing skills using both his Harvard-level professional insight and his personal experience from being a college dropout and a monk. And one of the things that's propelled Dr. K to this success is his world-class communication skills. And today, we're going to go over the 4 techniques that he says are the only communication skills that you need to have success. So let's get started. So consistently, one of the biggest issues that we face as humans is that our brains are set up to not take on problems directly. We don't like that psychologically. However, we absolutely demand that for everyone that we come into contact with, which leads to one of the biggest problems in communication. Or questioning. Anytime that we have any kind of issue with someone, our first instinct is to go right into the heart of the matter and ask them point blank, why are you doing X? Why do you do Y? This is absolutely terrible for communication. This triggers all of the other person's defense mechanisms. It doesn't give you any kind of information, and it just makes both parties worse for the result. Dr. K's first suggestion on the path to good communication is to ask open-ended questions. In the book, it suggested that instead of demanding your son tell you, why are you playing video games all day? It's like, hey, what is a fork knife? When you ask people non-judgmental open questions, you get to see where they're coming from. And in the process, you may learn something about the situation that you just simply were not aware of. We often want to tell people exactly what to do whenever we see some kind of problem because, obviously, we're just cursed with knowledge. We're only second to God in telling people how to live their lives. But this is not how people learn. And this is something that was discovered in ancient Greece. Socrates, the philosopher, found out that he got much better results instead of telling people exactly what to do by instead questioning them. And then through this process of open-ended questions, they would teach themselves the true lesson. And whenever you're talking about sensitive subjects, this is only even more important because you need to create as much space as possible to allow the person to feel comfortable to answer these sensitive questions. And in the book, he suggests that instead of drilling in immediately on that person, maybe it's better to make a more generic question, not even particularly involving that person. Instead of yo, son, do you have terminal brain rot? Maybe it's yo, does anyone at your school own Hot Tua merchandise? But the most important thing that you need to remember is that this is not a lecture. You and this other person are trying to team up to solve this problem. You're not here to say this is exactly how you should be doing this. This is an open conversation, which brings up the second point. Technique 2, use reflective listening. It's at this point that Dr. K points out that if you're following the advice, you're asking these open-ended questions, and you're getting better results than what you were before. However, it's at this point you need to switch the techniques up. Too many open-ended questions in a row just starts to feel like an interrogation. What is your favorite meal? Cottage cheese. Why is that your favorite meal? It stops the voices. And the way that we break up these open-ended questions is with the second technique, which is called reflective listening. Now, reflective listening is a very easy, or should I say, simple technique that is incredibly hard to do because it goes completely against our natural psychology. It is simply, you are going to repeat what they just said back to them. The way that this is going to work is in a conversation, if the other person's my favorite color is red, your natural instinct is likely either to go off something that they said, either, hey, I saw a sign that was red once. I think it was actually a stop sign. I just drove past it though, so I didn't get to see it that clearly. But if you were using the reflective listening technique, this conversation would go more like this. My favorite color is red. It sounds like your favorite color is red. This may make a little bit more sense if we're not talking about colors. As an example, in the book, he gives the situation of your daughter came to you and is I feel so ugly. Instead of the default response, which would be, no, you're beautiful, blah, 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 blah. Instead, you would go, I'm hearing that you're saying that you feel ugly. That must be really bad. That must feel really terrible. And this is most important when negativity is in the conversation. Anytime that we have a problem, our immediate lizard brain reaction is to either problem solve or just simply argue. The issue is is that when we do that, we are simply just invalidating the other person's emotions, regardless if we're intending to do that or not. And this is something that you can actually see in your own lives, because if you've ever had something that you've been questioning, you're like, hey, should I eat 40 hot dogs for lunch? And they're like, I don't know. I don't think that you could. Before the end of the sentence, you're having them bring them out. To contrast that, if you offer no opposition to their statement, it's like pushing on an open door. They're like, oh, okay, yeah, I have no fear about this. And in fact, a lot of the time, they'll just begin questioning themselves. This is because, as Dr. K explains, anytime that you have an argument, the amygdala, which is the fear center of the brain, will flare up and immediately, just stonewall any of these other options. However, if you're not offering, any kind of opposition to this, it has no reason to be afraid. So there's no reason to stonewall. And once you've got those two techniques down, you can supplement it with the third technique, which is express confusion. And this can be a little bit tricky because it can almost come off like you're making fun of someone if you're not, right on the money with this. So to make sure I get this right, I'm actually just going to read from the book right here. So the exact situation that he brings up in the book is if someone's having a problem with drinking and they come into his office, he's going to start the conversation like this. People in your life seem to be really concerned with your drinking. Patient: no, it's really not a problem. And instead of arguing with them, Dr. K would then express confusion. Dr. K: okay, so help me understand. What brings you here? Patient: there are some problems at home. My wife is upset with me and I'm having some problems at work. Dr. K: okay, what are your problems at work? Patient: my boss says I have a drinking problem. And then at that point, express confusion again. Dr. K: I'm super confused. If you don't have a problem, why do all these people in your life think that you have a problem? And if you don't have a problem, what are we doing here in my office? And in response to this technique, the patient will then have to begin sharing more concrete details, and you actually have something to talk about. The biggest issue with this technique is honestly coming off like you are confused. That will honestly take practice, because some of these things you will want to, with every fiber of your being, just tell them exactly what it is. So if you're asking in this confused manner, you're going to come off just insulting. You have to actually act like you're confused. But this technique is absolutely excellent for putting the ball in the other person's court, because when you're saying, hey, I don't know this situation, can you explain it? However, one of the most common things that you'll run into if you do use this technique is that the other person will just not really have an answer for their actions. And that brings up the fourth technique: go meta. So one of the most important things that you have to keep in mind anytime that you're trying to talk to someone about an existentially important question that they're probably not doing the best on is they are trying to avoid it with every fiber of their being. There's a reason why every time that you're asking about it, they're avoiding the questions or they're changing the subject. It's because they are trying themselves to not think about it. And the only way to go around this obstacle is to go above it. You have to have the oversight to note the patterns of the conversations, not the specific content of each specific conversation. As in, have you noticed that we're always having this kind of specific issue? Or have you noticed that we're always fighting around this problem? It's also a way to open yourself up and admit fault. Hey, I feel like I'm the one that's always getting mad at you for this. What's going on? And by being vulnerable, it allows you to note with acceptance that this is a problem and hey, I don't know how to solve it exactly. It's at this point that Dr. K notes that if you use these techniques successfully, you should have been able to triangulate the problem, and you're both on even footing in understanding that this is an issue. And it is at this point that you must do what may be the hardest part of the entire equation, which is give it to the other party. You may be able to offer them a better solution, something that is objectively better than their current situation, but at some point, you just gotta let them pee on the electric fence themselves. But by allowing them to have the consequences of their actions and you not saving them, this allows them to see that, hey, I may actually have some problems and we had this honest conversation. I'm willing to listen now. And this was honestly what was so impressive for me, because while this book is very much written for parents, it is just completely good communication skills for everyday life. But while these communication skills may help you succeed in the world, it's also equally important to be aware of the psychological tricks that other people may want to play on you. And you can learn a little bit more about that in this video.